to a band which I listened to in the not too distant past, that is Evanescence. And, well, the first piece I listened to was My Immortal. And that was an interesting introduction to the band, a fairly musically basic piece of music, but very pleasantly presented. And tonight I'm going to be listening to another one entitled Lithium. Well, I have some things to say about that, but first let me remind you, if you wish to support my journey as I explore new music, new to me music, you can always check out my Ko-fi and Patreon. You'll find all kinds of things there which can't ever come public here on YouTube. One of which right now is really progressing forward, and that is the Beatles 150 series, so check it out if you wish. So, Lithium. What is this about lithium? Well, I have to say that when I heard the title of the piece, my first thought was, lithium? Like in batteries? And what else? Well, lithium is a metal, right? It's part of the periodic table. Well, I understand it's highly flammable. Funny to think of a metal as being highly flammable, but those things exist. I also know that it is used sometimes medicinally for mood disorders, some pretty severe psychological imbalances. Why the title, Lithium? Well, being that it's a metal, except Amy Lee's music isn't really metallic, at least the first one I listened to, so I don't think that it's really... Anyway, so after kind of going through all of this in my mind and some of it out loud, Vlad showed me a little clip of Amy Lee, the composer herself, explaining her kind of the background ideas to the piece. It turns out that she was equating lithium with happiness. Well, she says she's never used the drug, so she's never experienced it herself, but she's using lithium kind of symbolically as representing happiness and her kind of conflictual relationship with the idea of being happy as an artist. Well, that's interesting because I actually have a little book on my shelf which is entitled Against Happiness. And it's not hostile towards happiness, but it's making the case that at least the American style of always needing to appear happy and be happy and put forth a happy face is really not conducive to deeper personal exploration, certainly not helpful for artists to try to always pretend that they are happy. And of course, it goes into some of the great works of art and the tragedies or the mental struggles that were kind of the backdrop to the creation of those works of art. So it actually didn't surprise me to see that Amy Lee had this kind of conflict with happiness and saying, you know, I have this band, I'm performing, I'm successful, I am happy, but do I want to be happy? Do I want to acknowledge that I'm happy? Because maybe it will mess me up, as it will destroy my artistic side. Well, of course, that's a little bit extreme, and she acknowledges that she should accept happiness when it comes. Interesting thoughts. So I understand that is the background idea behind this piece, and kind of an interesting title, way of approaching it, but let's see what I have to read about it, and then I will listen. Lithium is a song from Evanescence's second studio album, The Open Door, which was released on December 4, 2006. The song was written by singer and pianist Amy Lee. She initially wrote it on guitar when she was 16 years old, and later reworked it on piano. So this is one that's been with her for quite some time. The single entered the top 40 in multiple countries, where it spent several weeks charting. Lee used the word lithium as a, quote, metaphor for numbness for herself, adding that she's known people on the medication and has seen its effects. She described the song's theme as a representation of, quote, happiness from a negative point of view. Isn't that an interesting idea? Happiness from a negative point of view. Viewing it as again in quotes, "I don't want to numb myself and not feel anymore." Her inspiration for the song was the feeling that she was in love with sorrow, in love with my sorrow. Elaborating in an interview, she stated, "I get into these moods where I write music. It's not about so much about being depressed. It's just the strange low that I ride. But at the same time, I want to be free and break through and be happy." I think that was kind of me getting ready to play and saying, "That's it, drop the ball and just change and move on." Interesting, these ideas being expressed here are not so far off from what I was saying about that book entitled Against Happiness. A Stornoway Gazette writer dubbed the song an extreme power ballad maelstrom, and a rare instance of when pop metal actually does justice to both musical genres. Well, maybe this is kind of considered metallic then as well. Appropriate. Lithium.
Lithium, don't wanna lock me up inside. Lithium, don't wanna forget how it feels without lithium. I wanna stay in love with my soul. Oh, but God, I wanna let it go. Come to bed, don't make me sleep alone. Couldn't hide the emptiness and let it show. Never wanted it to be so cold. Just didn't drink enough to say you love me. I can't hold on to me. Wonder what's wrong with me. Lithium, don't wanna lock me up inside. Lithium, don't wanna forget how it feels without lithium. I wanna stay in love with my soul. I don't wanna let it.
But this really just goes and goes and goes. And one of the things that I'm noticing is and really enjoying is the layering and build up of this piece of music. I noticed that, well, it's interesting with this whole idea of happiness from a negative perspective, all of this. The music is in a minor key, and it is rather, she leans on some long notes. It's these long notes are a real feature of the song. Leaning in lithium, and that leaning into it as if there's an emphasis, there's a sadness about it, a sadness about the happiness or the numbness. It's interesting that she is equating happiness with numbness in this song, at least according to what she said in the interview. I can't help but think, because I've been there recently, jump over to Roger Waters' Comfortably Numb. And again, this idea that if we numb ourselves, if we just put our troubles out of the way, stash them down beneath our feet, then we can get on with the show. We can continue whatever our agenda might be. And the lyrics, don't want to lock me up inside, don't want to forget how it feels without. I want to stay in love with my sorrow. This idea that we as artists, we want to be sure that we stay connected to our inner self. That is what we recognize as kind of the creative fountain, the spring of our creativity is our real self. And that includes all the moods, sadness, melancholy, as well as happiness. To me, this song speaks about something very important. Maybe from a slightly different angle than the composer herself was experiencing as she created it. To me, it speaks against this superficiality. This need to pretend everything's okay. At least to present ourselves as though everything is okay all the time. Not necessarily present it to the world, but present to ourselves that everything's okay, when it's not. Don't want to lock me up inside. If we are always kind of numbing ourselves to our emotional core, pretending it's happy. And probably we are happy on some level. But it's not just happiness. There's a whole span of emotions which are very deeply a part of the human experience. And if we don't take time to acknowledge and express and experience those emotions when they come to us, we will end up being, we could say, locked up inside, forgetting how it feels to be without that numbing quality. So in a way, we have a need. We must stay in love with our sorrow. Although I don't see genuine happiness as a numbness. It is one of those incredible human emotions. And I think that's kind of what Amy Lee was getting at, is that while we don't want to numb ourselves with this artificial happiness, to be true to ourselves, we do have to acknowledge and experience and let it go, let ourselves go into the real happiness when it comes. And so when this comes to the darling, I forgive you after all. In other words, happiness, I forgive you. Let me go into this happiness. Let's immerse ourselves into this happiness that is coming. And the way the music builds up to that moment, and this wonderful power that is we could say it's a piece of music with a grand crescendo, isn't it? At least up until this point. I don't know what comes after. But I enjoyed this build up and this layering of instruments one after the other, starting with this slow ballad, Lithium, and the piano up and down, nice gentle arpeggios, and then the strings enter and it becomes warmer and lusher, and then the guitar and the drums enter, and then it even more comes pouring in, and we're building up to this moment of let it go. So I'm going to back up just a little bit and listen to that, because then it came to this kind of gap in the sound, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Don't wanna forget how it feels, but I'm living. I wanna stay in love with my sorrow. I don't wanna let it lay me down this time. Drown
this description? Extreme power ballad maelstrom. It doesn't sound like a maelstrom to me. It sounds incredibly focused and progressing through sequence after sequence of melodic line, nice melodic lines. It could almost, well, if it weren't for the power of the instruments behind it, these long sustained notes would actually kind of be a bit weak. But the balance of a long sustained note, just enough syncopation to keep it lifted and progressing forwards and building in intensity. That's a tricky balance to strike, and I feel like the music is doing that really well here.
Give you afternoon. Anything is better than to be alone. And in the end, I guess I had to fall. Always find my place among the ashes. I can't hold out to me. Wonder what's wrong with me. Don't wanna lock me up inside Lithium. Don't wanna forget.
I think that's the moment where I think that's the highest note I've heard so far. It's always been and then dropping down. But now she's leaning in a bit higher, so she's kind of saved the climactic push to the very end, which of course makes sense if it's something that is a grand build-up to a release. Also reminds me of some of the old classics, and maybe she's kind of modeled this after some of those. I'm thinking especially of things like Stairway to Heaven, which, you know, that was such a big hit, and everybody got sick of it, but clearly it set a standard. It created a precedent, a model for something like this to be just continually building and building. Or something like Child in Time, which has a couple peaks and then another build up, even more impactful at the very end. This is kind of like kind of like Stairway to Heaven, in that it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. There are a couple places where it eased a bit to build a bit more, just like Child in Time. And I've listened to both of those. You can find those links, and I'll try to have Vlad put them here, because it's been a while since I listened to those, but I remember them distinctly, and I did an in-depth to each of them, so really dug into some of the musical content. And I'm hearing a lot of the same approaches here. Form-wise, the overall design and vision for the piece, this build-up and propulsion towards a tension point, a climax moment. And this note that rose up in pitch, well, I don't know what's coming after it. We'll find out in a moment. But it really feels like we're coming to that grand climax right at the end, because I see here that we're close to the end of the song. But notice how that was tense, that was building tension, and then finally, when she even rose higher, it was as if it was kind of an escape upwards. Nice to think about that with the idea of happiness. building tension, being afraid to be happy, afraid to let go, afraid to leave behind the angst and the sorrow, that the sadness that we find so fulfilling and rewarding, especially in our artistic expressions, and break through the ceiling, and either break through the ceiling or cut the chains that are holding us down, one way or the other. We escape upwards. And this moment here, as her voice just goes up and lightens, it is really a wonderful artistic image of that moment. And then once we break through, there's not much else to say, is there? Because suddenly we have allowed ourselves to enter a new dimension. A new dimension which, for an artist, can add, shall I liken it to gilding? You know, like gold leaf. It's the extra touch of light and gilded edges that make something come alive in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. We can have the depth and the shadows, and we can also have the gold leaf around the on the highlight moments, and suddenly it's an entirely different world. Yes, it sounds modern. Yes, I can see how it's kind of classed as pop. Perhaps metal, although it really doesn't strike me as being really heavy metal, but still pop metal. Okay, fine. But it's a good piece of music. It's well written. It's well designed, and for a modern composition, I have to say that it's really quite satisfying to listen to. As a singer, she manages her voice well throughout, and builds up the intensity, and the the range is pretty decent too. So there's a lot going on here, which is really quite admirable. Well, of course she's a pianist, so she wrote this at the piano, feeling the keys under her fingers. But listening to the way she has laid out this accompaniment, it really is quite suitable to the harp as well. And so I'm thinking, let's see how it sounds on the harp. Maybe I'll even try a bit of the melody too, but let's start with the accompaniment. We're in the key of B flat minor, I believe. So we're going something like this. I might take it a little bit slow, since this is raw sight reading, and it's, one of the things about playing piano music on the harp is that even when it looks like it should be very suitable, harpists only use 4 fingers on each hand, whereas pianists use 5 on each hand. And sometimes that really messes with our fingering setup and the way the music is laid out. So we'll see how this goes, but anyway, it's going to be okay. I think I missed something. There we go. Sounds really pleasant, doesn't it? I mean, if I took a little bit of time, kind of reformatted some of the layout of this, it could really be lovely on the harp. Well, what was I saying about the melody? There's something unique about the way this melody is set up, so that this long note that she leans into on Lithium. It does something, some music does this, but not very often, but it has this special little detail which gives us a sort of a propulsion forwards even as we're leaning on that note. So it starts out and then we're back to the F. Now, if I arrive on this F here and stop, it sounds like the end of the phrase. Listen. Time for a breath and then we move on. But no. That last note, which feels like the end of the phrase, is also the beginning of the next one. So what we have is and so it's kind of this special moment of, let's say that we are reading a sentence. It doesn't really work with language quite like it works in music, but I'll try to give an illustration. We're reading a sentence. We come to the final word of that sentence, and there's a period after it. But then we read the next sentence, and we suddenly realize, hold on, something's weird here. Because that last word of the sentence, which has the period after it, that last word has a capital at the beginning of it, and it is the beginning of the next sentence. Try to imagine that in your mind, and you'll get an idea of what this note here is doing. It is both the end of one and the beginning of another. So they overlap like this. One continues to here, the other begins back here. It's a cool feature. You find it sometimes in music, and because of this overlap, even though it's a very slow, smooth, kind of drawn out pace, soothing arpeggios underneath, which, you know, work on harp, work on piano, could modify them for guitar, whatever. Because of this overlap, it builds a sort of internal tension and sense of progression, propulsion, driving us forwards, because we never really come to a resting point, a breathing point, where we stop to get our breath. Da, 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 dum, da, 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 dum. No. Da, 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 dum, da, 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 dum, da, da. You see how there's something that kind of drives us forwards. So that's one of the little musical details that caught my eye and caught my ear in this song and works so well to carry us through. I was saying a little bit ago, as I was listening to it, that some of these long notes could lose their strength, lose their power without the instruments underneath. But it's not just that. It's not just the instruments helping them. It is also this overlapping of phrases that helps to keep things really pulling forwards and progressing towards a final climactic moment. And then we release. And because we don't get to release much before then, that release when it comes is so powerfully experienced. Really a great song, I have to say. As I said, it sounds modern. You know, it has all the modern mixing, recording, advantages, all of this. But it's a good piece of music. So there's my second listen to Evanescence. A lot of fun. Maybe I'll return to them sometime in the future. We'll see. I'll see you soon.